The night he asked for the divorce, my mother was still warm in the next room, waiting to be buried. I didn't cry. Not right away. I think my brain needed a second to process what he had just said. We were sitting in the kitchen, if you could call silence a setting, and Brett, my husband of 6 years, looked me in the eye and told me it was over. No hesitation, no apology. "She's gone now," he added, as if that explained everything. By she, he meant my mother. The woman who raised me alone, who fought through late-stage cancer with the kind of grit that made doctors uncomfortable. The woman who died 3 days ago in the upstairs bedroom because the hospice nurse didn't arrive on time. The woman whose funeral I was still planning. Brett waited until my guard was completely down before making his move. He didn't even look ashamed. He looked free. "You'll land on your feet," he said. I nodded slowly, numb. Not because I believed him, but because I suddenly understood something. This wasn't new for him. This wasn't a decision made out of grief. It was a strategy, and I had just been outplayed. I left the room without a word, climbed the stairs on autopilot, and locked the bedroom door behind me. I wasn't hiding. I was bracing. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat beside my mother's bed, where the scent of lavender and antiseptic still lingered. Her hand lotion was on the nightstand, her scarf was folded on the chair. She was everywhere and nowhere all at once, and now I was supposed to pack up her life and mine while Brett scrolled through real estate listings on his phone. The next morning, he handed me a coffee and a printed legal agreement. Separation of assets he had already filed, already contacted an attorney. I was still wearing the same jeans I'd cried in at the hospital. "It's better this way," he said. I think what shook me most wasn't the betrayal, it was how prepared he was. How cleanly he removed me from the version of his life he wanted now. He didn't want a grieving wife or a shared history. He wanted a clean start, and I was a loose end he was ready to snip. I stayed quiet for 2 days, handling funeral logistics and barely functioning. On the 3rd day, I called the bank to ask about the joint account my mother and I had shared for years. The one we used for her medical bills, prescriptions, food. The woman on the line paused. "That account was closed 2 weeks ago." "What?" I asked. "Yes, Mum. The request came from your husband. He had power of attorney." That wasn't possible. My mother had signed a medical proxy naming me, not Brett, and she never would have allowed him access to her finances. I hung up and ran to her file box, the one she kept under her bed. The legal papers were gone. The file marked estate had been emptied. My breath caught. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a theft in progress. I checked the trash bin, gone. I tore open drawers, checked her desk, the closet, even her Bible. Nothing. I finally opened my laptop and pulled up her email. She never logged out. The last sent message was a draft forwarded to Brett. Subject line, "Do not send." Attached, her old living will, the one naming me executor. And just like that, the nausea hit. Brett had been planning this for months. When I confronted him that night, he didn't deny it. "She was slipping," he said, "and you were too emotional to handle anything rationally. I stepped in." "You forged her signature," I said. "She didn't know what she was signing." My hands shook, but my voice didn't. "You preyed on a dying woman." He shrugged. "You can try to prove it. Good luck." Then he walked out. That's when I knew this wasn't heartbreak, it was war. The next morning, I started pulling thread, quietly, carefully. I went through her old notebooks, the ones she kept for grocery lists and appointments. I found one entry dated 2 months before her death. "Brett keeps pushing forms, keeps saying it's for my peace of mind. Doesn't feel peaceful." I scanned every page, took photos, backed them up to cloud storage. I called her old attorney in Spokane, disconnected. The office had closed 6 weeks ago, coincidentally right around the time her living will disappeared. By the end of the week, I had tracked down her hospice nurse, a woman named Kendra. I met her at a cafe, desperate for anything. She remembered my mum vividly. She always asked for you every day, Kendra said. She was scared about what would happen after. After? She said she thought someone was trying to silence her. She didn't want to say who. Kendra hesitated before continuing, and one time she asked if I had a safe place to mail a letter. I told her she could give it to me. Did she? I asked. Kendra nodded. I still have it. That letter changed everything. It wasn't long, just a few lines, but it was enough. If you're reading this, I'm likely gone. Please know I tried, I asked for help, but I was told I was confused. I'm not. I know what Brett is doing, and I'm scared for Sarah. She doesn't see it yet. Please, if you can, protect her. It was signed in shaky ink, my mother's full name. I took that letter to a lawyer friend back in college, Lauren, now practicing estate law in Oregon. I sent her scanned copies of everything, the notebook entry, the email trail, the letter. She called me 24 hours later. This isn't just unethical, this might be criminal. That night, I packed my bags. I left the house while Brett was at a dinner meeting. I took my mother's journals, her backup drive, and the only photo of us he hadn't cropped. I left a note that read, "You buried more than my mother, and I'm done letting you shovel." I didn't disappear. I repositioned. That's the part Brett didn't expect. He thought I'd collapse, maybe spiral for a while, and then go quietly. But grief wasn't a weight anymore. It was leverage, and I had just begun to pull. Lauren, my lawyer friend, sent a list of actions to take. Document everything, she said. Every call, every file, every interaction. He's counting on silence and chaos. Give him neither. So I did. I started with the bank. I requested transaction records for the closed account. The clerk hesitated when she saw my name, but printed them anyway. They showed a transfer, 1 week before my mother's death, of nearly $18,000 to a private investment firm in Brett's name. There was no record of a repayment, no approval from my mother, no legal authorization tied to me, just a single digital signature and a withdrawal note that read, "End of life arrangements." That money was meant for hospice, medication, food. I sent the documents to Lauren. Next, I went to the county records office. The woman behind the desk was older, polite. I asked if there had been any property title changes involving my mother's name. She typed quietly, then looked up at me with something between pity and discomfort. "Yes, there was a quitclaim deed filed 6 weeks ago," she said. "It transferred her half of the property to Brett." I froze. My mother didn't sign that. She slid a printed copy across the counter. The signature was there, crooked and too clean at the same time. I stared at it. My mother hadn't been able to hold a pen properly in the last month of her life. I knew that because I'd helped her fill out a birthday card for a neighbor and watched the pen fall from her hand 3 times before she gave up. This signature wasn't shaky, it was fake. I didn't yell, I didn't demand answers, I just said thank you, folded the document, and walked out into the cold wind like it had been waiting for me. That night, I stayed at a motel just outside Spokane. No one knew I was there. I laid every piece of evidence out on the bed: the letter from my mother, the bank records, the property transfer, the power of attorney form with the mismatched signature. I photographed them again, uploaded everything into a cloud folder, and labeled it "If I Disappear." Paranoid, maybe, but Brett had already proven one thing: the more invisible I became, the more power he gained. The next day, I reached out to someone unexpected: Brett's former assistant, Monica. She had worked for him for 4 years and left 6 months ago with no explanation. I found her through a mutual contact and sent a message. "I need your help. I think you saw more than you let on." To my surprise, she replied within the hour. We met in a parking lot, not dramatic, just practical. Monica climbed into my passenger seat, looked at me for a long moment, and said, "I always liked your mother. She brought you soup when you had the flu, remember? Brett never even came home that weekend." I nodded. I remembered everything. Then she handed me a USB drive. I don't want to be in the middle of this, she said. But if what I think is happening is true, you're going to need proof. The files included email chains between Brett and a financial advisor, subject lines like liquidation plan, real estate absorption, post-transition asset control. One line stood out, written 2 months before my mother passed. Once she's out of the picture, we'll restructure. I gave the drive to Lauren. Her response was immediate. This isn't just a civil case anymore. This is potential fraud with intent to manipulate an estate. She drafted an emergency injunction to freeze all transfers and property sales connected to my mother's name. We filed it the next morning. The judge reviewed the documentation and signed off within hours. Brett was officially blocked. He called that night. I didn't answer. Then he texted, "You're blowing this out of proportion. It's going to cost you more than it's worth." No apology, no denial, just pressure. I didn't respond. Instead, I sent screenshots to Lauren and added them to the folder. Then came the emails, anonymous, poorly veiled threats. Stay out of things you don't understand. She wouldn't want this dragged out in court. This will ruin you. But I wasn't scared. I was done shrinking. 2 days later, Lauren received a call from a local journalist named Ben Morales. He had heard whispers of the injunction and was looking into similar complaints against Brett. Financial inconsistencies, sudden power of attorney changes, elderly clients with no family left to speak for them. "Your case could break this open," he said. I hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of exposure." He paused. "That's fair, but sometimes the truth needs more than the courtroom. It needs daylight." I agreed to a meeting. I didn't commit to going public, not yet, but I gave him the timeline, the letters, the fraud. He listened carefully, asked the right questions, and never once looked surprised, just sad. "You're not the first," he said, "but you might be the first to fight back this hard." That night, I drove back to the house, the one Brett tried to erase me from. I didn't go inside. I just sat across the street in the dark, watching the porch light flicker like it had forgotten how to stay on. The windows were dark, the driveway was empty. It wasn't home anymore, but it wasn't his either. I sat there until dawn, then started the engine and drove towards something that felt like the beginning of the end. The day the court froze Brett's access to my mother's estate, something shifted. Not in the world, yet, but in me. The fear that had wrapped around my ribs for weeks loosened. I didn't feel victorious, not exactly, more like steady. A kind of weightless resolve I hadn't known I needed. Lauren called early that morning. Her voice was firm, no edge of hesitation. "You're officially in control of the estate again, temporarily at least, and Brett's legal team has 30 days to respond." I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the road ahead. It wasn't over, but it wasn't just his game anymore. That afternoon, I drove back to the house, not out of nostalgia, but because the silence had gone on too long. He hadn't contacted me in days. That wasn't like him. Brett didn't go quiet unless he was about to make noise somewhere else. The yard was overgrown, the porch light still flickering. I parked on the opposite side of the street again, this time not caring if anyone saw. He wasn't there. The house felt abandoned in a way that had nothing to do with dust. Then I noticed the mail piling up on the step. Among the usual flyers and bills was a manila envelope, its corner bent and water-stained. My name was handwritten on the front, no stamp, no return address. I crossed the street and picked it up. Inside was a printed email thread between Brett and a local probate officer. In it, Brett argued that I was emotionally unstable, financially incompetent, and too grief-stricken to manage the estate responsibly. Attached was a fabricated medical note dated just after my mother's funeral. It claimed I had been treated for a psychological episode. The name on the document, a therapist I'd never met. In fact, the clinic didn't even exist. I searched the address listed. It was a vacant office space that hadn't been leased in 2 years. He was trying to discredit me, quietly, professionally, just enough to plant doubt. I scanned the envelope for prints or clues, but it was clean, typical. Brett's weapon of choice was always perception, subtle damage that left no traceable wound. I took photos of everything and called Lauren, her tone sharpened. This isn't just fraud anymore, this is a smear campaign. You need to get ahead of it before it spreads. We decided to make it public. Not all of it, just enough. Ben Morales, the journalist, agreed to run a story focused on elder financial manipulation and unethical estate control. We didn't name Brett, not yet, but the timeline was there. The forged documents, the testimony, the trail of decisions made by a man who assumed no one would check. The article went live on a Wednesday evening. By Thursday morning, I had 3 voicemails, 2 from women, 1 from a man. Each told a variation of the same story. My aunt signed everything over to her caretaker before she passed. My stepdad gained control of my grandmother's account while she was on hospice. My father didn't even know he was giving up control. They weren't looking for justice, they were looking for someone who didn't hang up. On Friday, Brett's lawyer filed a motion to dismiss the injunction. The claim, no clear evidence of fraud. Emotional testimony is not admissible in place of documented proof. Lauren smiled when she read it. They're getting nervous. This is their first mistake. We filed a counter-motion with new documentation, the falsified therapist letter, the transaction history, the signature comparisons from 3 medical witnesses who had seen my mother's actual handwriting during her final weeks. One nurse had even signed an affidavit stating my mother could barely grip a pen, let alone sign legal documents. The court set a hearing, 2 weeks. That night, I visited my mother's old church. The new secretary didn't recognize me, but an older volunteer named May did. She hugged me like no time had passed and whispered, "She always knew you'd be the one to speak up." I asked if the church still had her letters. She used to write birthday cards, condolences, encouragements. May brought out a shoebox filled with folded notes and yellowed envelopes. I didn't know what I was looking for, but somewhere in that box was a truth she left behind, and I found it. A letter, dated 3 months before her death. Addressed to a woman named Martha, a longtime friend from church who had passed away herself just weeks earlier. Brett keeps asking me to sign papers, says it's for ease, but I feel erased. I asked Sarah to stay out of it, but now I wonder if I made a mistake. Sometimes I think he's waiting for me to stop noticing. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't even angry, but it was clear and dated, and written in my mother's hand. That note, combined with her letter to Kendra, her journal entries and the clinic fraud, built a narrative that no court could dismiss as emotional. We were building a case, not just a defense. Then, just days before the hearing, something unexpected happened. Brett texted me. Not a threat, not an insult, just 2 words. "Let's talk." I didn't reply. I forwarded it to Lauren, who told me to say nothing, not even to acknowledge it. This is bait. They want to delay or settle under terms that protect his name, don't bite. I didn't. Instead, I called Monica, the former assistant, one more time. I asked if she remembered anything else. Anything Brett might have done during my mother's final month that we hadn't yet discovered. She paused, then said, "Actually, yes." She remembered a conversation Brett had with a notary, something about rescheduling a document signing. Monica thought it was about refinancing, but now, in hindsight, she wasn't so sure. She gave me the notary's name. I reached out. The woman replied the next morning with a scanned log of appointments. There it was, my mother's name, date and time. A visit to our home 3 days before her final hospitalization. But the notary included a note. No one answered the door, appointment marked incomplete, no documents signed. Which meant that any document dated that day, any signature attributed to my mother, was a lie. We had our smoking gun. That evening, I printed everything. I organized the files by category, labeled each photo, clipped each affidavit. I slept with the folder beside my bed, not out of fear, out of purpose. This wasn't just my fight anymore. I wasn't reclaiming money or property. I was reclaiming my mother's voice and mine. Next stop, court. The courthouse smelled like old paper and cold air. I didn't bring anyone with me. I didn't need support. I needed clarity. Brett walked in flanked by two attorneys. He looked exactly like someone who still believed he could spin this into misunderstanding. That was his talent. Make the truth seem unreasonable. Make the damage seem like a detail. He didn't look at me, not once. The judge opened the hearing with a firm reminder. This wasn't a criminal trial yet, but a hearing to determine whether Brett had knowingly and unlawfully altered estate documentation for personal gain. If the evidence pointed that way, the case would escalate. Lauren handled the opening argument. She kept it precise. No emotional appeals, just facts. A medical proxy naming me, dated 6 months before my mother's death. A falsified power of attorney form, dated during a time when my mother couldn't even hold a pen. Bank transactions funneled into Brett's private accounts. Testimony from a notary who confirmed my mother missed the appointment on the same day her signature appeared. A typed therapist note from a non-existent clinic. When Brett's attorney responded, she played the only angle they had left: misunderstanding. She was confused, she said, speaking of my mother. She often contradicted herself. Mr. Carver simply stepped in where needed to avoid financial chaos during an emotionally volatile time. They presented a video clip, a home recording. Brett had filmed my mother sitting in the garden one afternoon. She looked tired but calm. In the video, she nodded along to something Brett was saying about trusting him to handle the finances. No audio from her, just a quiet, tired nod. The courtroom was silent after the clip. Lauren stood again. And what did she say 5 minutes after that recording? Brett's lawyer objected. The judge allowed it. We played a voicemail. It was from the same day, time-stamped 15 minutes after the recording. My mother's voice shaking, left on my phone. Sarah, I don't know what I just agreed to. He kept saying it would be easier if I just signed, but it didn't feel right. Please come tomorrow. I had missed the call. I had been in traffic. I never got the chance to call her back. The judge didn't speak for a long time. Then he looked at Brett and asked, "Did you explain the documents she signed?" "Yes," Brett said. "Was she under medication at the time?" "No," I stood. "She was on morphine." Lauren handed over the dosage records from hospice. It showed that 2 hours before Brett filmed that video, my mother had received her full daily dose. That changed everything. The judge paused the hearing for 20 minutes. I stepped into the hallway and sat on a bench facing the window. Outside, everything looked normal. I wondered how many people walked past this building every day without realizing what was unraveling behind its doors. Brett's attorney approached me. "She'll rule against you," she said, "but the fallout will be quiet if you walk away now. No press, no further review, no public mess." I stared at her. "You're wrong," I said, "but even if you weren't, quiet isn't the goal anymore." She stepped back. When court resumed, the judge's tone had changed. She addressed both legal teams. Based on the evidence presented, including the falsified medical letter, the financial inconsistencies, and the mental state of the decedent at the time of signature, I'm granting full temporary conservatorship to Ms. Grayson, pending criminal review. Brett didn't flinch. Not visibly, but I watched his knuckles whiten. He didn't expect to lose, not in public. The judge wasn't done. I'm also recommending this case be forwarded to the district attorney's office for investigation under elder abuse and estate fraud statutes. This court will not tolerate the manipulation of vulnerable individuals, emotionally, medically, or financially. It was over. Not the fight, but the silence. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. Ben Morales stood quietly among them, not asking questions, just recording. I didn't stop for interviews. I didn't speak to anyone. I got into my car, turned the key, and exhaled. Lauren called 10 minutes later. "You did it," she said. "No," I said. "We just made it impossible to look away." The fallout came fast. Brett was suspended from his firm within 48 hours. The story broke national the following week, under a headline that made my hands shake. Heir by deception, financial advisor under review after widow exposes alleged elder fraud. I didn't ask to be the face of anything, but suddenly people were writing, sharing, calling. A woman from Ohio messaged me. "My mother signed her will under hospice sedation. I thought it was legal. Thank you for showing me it wasn't." A son in Arizona. "Your story helped me reopen my dad's case. They forged his signature." Not all messages were kind. Some said I was exploiting grief, that I'd ruined a man's life over a misunderstanding. I didn't respond. They didn't know what silence costs when it's weaponized. 3 weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a ripped photo. It was from our wedding day. The corner with Brett's face was burned, edges curled inward. I took a picture, added it to the file. That file was no longer for me. It was for the next person, the one who might not have the time or clarity or help I did. I visited my mother's grave the day the DA confirmed formal charges would be filed. I brought nothing, no flowers, just the court ruling, printed and folded in my coat pocket. I stood there for a while, not crying, not angry, just still. "I kept the promise," I whispered. She had once told me, back when I was still in high school, and too angry at the world to hear it. "We don't fight to win, we fight so the truth isn't alone." That stayed with me, even when she didn't, even when I nearly didn't. The first time I heard my voice on the news, it didn't feel like mine. The segment opened with a clip from the courthouse steps, me walking past cameras, jaw locked, focus forward. They called me a daughter-turned-whistleblower, which sounded cleaner than the truth. The truth was messier. The truth was I had waited too long, missed a call that might have changed everything, and then spent months undoing a lie. But now the story wasn't just mine. The feature ran on a Tuesday evening, and by Wednesday, my inbox had collapsed under the weight of strangers' stories. I'd opened a temporary email account just to collect messages from people like me. I expected a few, I got hundreds. Most started the same way. I thought I was alone. There were daughters, sons, nephews, former neighbors, even nurses. They described sudden changes to wills, pressure to sign power of attorney forms. Loved ones left isolated, confused, rewritten out of their own lives. They weren't asking for solutions, they were looking for witnesses. 3 weeks after the ruling, Lauren called with an update. The DA's office is moving forward with 3 felony counts: fraud, manipulation of a vulnerable adult, and financial exploitation. I didn't ask what the maximum sentence was. I wasn't looking for jail time. I was looking for proof that the system wasn't completely blind when it wanted to be. "They also want your help," Lauren added. "They're drafting legislative proposals based on the gaps your case exposed." "What kind of proposals?" "Mandatory waiting periods between hospice admittance and any legal document signing, independent third-party notaries for estate documents, clear tracking for power of attorney transfers." It sounded like a policy brief, but I heard what it really meant. Next time, someone like my mother might not get erased. One evening, I received a direct message from someone I hadn't heard from in months, Silas, my half-brother. His message was short. "I want to talk. I'm sorry it took this long." I waited 3 days before answering. "We met in the park we used to visit as kids, neutral ground. He looked older, thinner. He sat first." "I saw the broadcast," he said. "I knew he was controlling, but I didn't think it was this deep." "You didn't want to think." He nodded. "That's fair." There was a long pause. "Why didn't you come forward?" I asked. "You were in the house. You saw the papers. You saw her." His jaw tensed. "Because I was afraid he'd do to me what he did to you, make me look unstable. irrational. I have a daughter now, I couldn't risk it. I believed him. I didn't forgive him, but I believed him. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small flash drive. I found this in Mom's safe deposit box. I didn't know she even had one. Her attorney must have kept it open. I took the drive without speaking. Later that night, I opened it. Inside were photos, scans of every major document she'd signed, older wills, letters, notes she'd written to herself, labeled by date. One was titled, "If I Forget." If I forget who I am, if they tell you I've changed, please remember I've always known you'd come back for me. I closed the file and sat in the dark for a while. She'd prepared for the erasure long before it came. 2 months later, I was invited to speak at a national elder advocacy conference. I said no, twice. Then I remembered what Lauren told me during our first meeting. You're not here to be comfortable, you're here because silence already failed. So I stood on stage in front of 400 people, most older than me, many survivors themselves, and told the truth out loud. Not just about Brett, but about what it means to watch someone you love get rewritten in real time. I talked about the legal gaps, yes, but also the emotional ones. The moments when institutions treated me like a grieving woman with a vendetta instead of a person with facts. The way people softened their voices when I spoke, like I might shatter. Afterward, a woman approached me. Grey hair, steady voice. "You said something I've never heard before," she said. "What was that?" "That silence isn't safety, it's strategy for the wrong people." Back home, I started working with a non-profit focused on elder rights. I helped review legal proposals, draft communication strategies, and train volunteers on what warning signs to look for. They asked if I'd ever consider writing a book. I said maybe. What I wanted to do more than write was prevent someone else from making the same mistake I did, waiting too long to ask questions. I didn't hear from Brett after the ruling. His legal team filed for a plea deal before the criminal trial began. I was told he might serve probation, maybe some house arrest. I didn't care. This was never about revenge. It was about returning the story to the person it belonged to. One day, I visited the cottage near the river, the one where I'd stayed with my mother during her last clear weeks. It was quiet, the snow just beginning to fall. I sat with her old journal and read the final entry. "Sarah has my eyes. She just doesn't know how sharp they are yet." I know now. A few days later, a reporter reached out. They were preparing a follow-up. "Do you want to comment on the case's closure?" they asked. I thought about it. Then I said, "Write this. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just refusing to disappear." The case didn't end. It just stopped being the headline. 3 months after the plea deal, Brett moved out of state. The DA confirmed he'd taken the reduced sentence, 3 years probation, restitution, and a ban from financial advising. There would be no prison, no mugshot. He'd disappear the same way he operated, quietly. I didn't watch the news that day. I went hiking instead. Not because I wanted peace, but because I needed distance. From the emails, the phone calls, the articles asking if I'd speak again, the system gave me an outcome, yes. But it didn't return what was taken. Not my mother's final days. Not the version of me that trusted too easily. The only part I could still protect was what came next. I spent the following months documenting other stories, not mine, theirs. Women who didn't know how to navigate probate court. Men whose parents had been tricked into signing over life insurance policies. Adult children accused of manipulation just for asking questions. The non-profit offered me a permanent position, helping develop early detection guidelines for guardianship abuse. I wasn't a lawyer, I wasn't a social worker, but I knew the red flags better than most. I called it the Paper Trail Project. We trained volunteers to help families spot changes in tone, handwriting, timing. We created an encrypted form submission process so people could report suspicious estate changes before it was too late. The cases came in slowly at first, then weekly, then daily. And I learned something. Most people don't ignore injustice because they're cruel. They ignore it because it's messy, inconvenient, complicated. Brett had counted on that. He wasn't alone. One cold morning in January, a letter arrived. No return address. Handwritten. Not a threat this time, just a name. Her name was Annabelle. She was my mother. The note continued in tight handwriting, clipped phrases. The sender described how his mother, Annabelle, had transferred her will to a neighbor's adult son while under heavy sedation. The man was never charged. The family was left to fight each other over what remained. He ended the letter with, "I didn't stop it in time, but I'm still here. What do I do with that?" I wrote him back, "You speak, and if you can't yet, let me." By spring, we had 24 volunteers, 3 legal partners, and a waiting list of families who needed help reviewing estate documents. Some days I was exhausted, the kind of tired that settles behind your eyes and doesn't move. But I showed up. Because I remembered what it felt like to be the only person who knew the truth, and still couldn't get anyone to listen, and I wasn't letting anyone else sit in that place alone. Silas and I started speaking again, not often, not deeply, but consistently. He came to one of the non-profit meetings, sat in the back, said nothing, just listened. Afterward, he waited until everyone had gone, then approached me. "You're not who I thought you'd become," he said. I braced. He added, "You're stronger." I nodded. "That's what surviving does." He handed me an envelope. Inside were 3 old photographs of Mom I hadn't seen in years. One of her in college, another holding me as a toddler, and one I didn't remember at all. Her sitting alone at a diner table, smiling at someone behind the camera. "I found them in a drawer Brett missed," he said. "Thought you'd want them." I took them home and added them to the archive. Not because I needed more photos, but because I needed undisturbed proof that she'd existed before any of this. Ben Morales, the journalist who first ran our story, reached out again in April. A national podcast had picked up the case and wanted to interview me. "We don't need a scandal," he said. "We need a system story. People are ready for more than outrage." I agreed, but I set conditions. No drama, no music, no narration that painted me as either a victim or a hero. Just facts and how to spot them early. They titled the episode, "What They Signed When Consent Isn't Real." It aired on a Tuesday. By Thursday, donations to the non-profit tripled. A state senator emailed us asking to help draft legislation. A retired judge volunteered his time to review archived estate cases. It was working, not loud, but steady. And yet, some nights the quiet came back. Not grief, doubt. Had I done enough? Had I waited too long to act? Was I trying to undo something that couldn't be undone? Then I'd open the file marked E.G. Legacy, the one with Mum's letters, the court records, the timeline. I'd scroll past the legal terms, past the affidavits, to her journal entry from 2 years before her decline. I wonder if Sarah knows she's already brave, not the kind of brave that yells, the kind that shows up anyway. I stayed with that line a while, then I'd close the file and keep going. We never moved back into the house. I sold it, not because I wanted to forget, but because I refused to let her final years be defined by walls Brett had tried to control. The proceeds went into a trust. The first scholarship from that trust funded a law student's summer internship in elder rights. Her name was Eva. She emailed me after finishing her first client case. "I helped stop a forged POA. I thought you'd want to know." I did. People ask me sometimes, "What would you say to Brett if you saw him now?" My answer stays the same. Nothing. He already heard the only thing that mattered, the judge reading the ruling out loud in a courtroom where he couldn't rewrite the script. This story didn't end with justice. It ended with prevention, with other daughters, other sons, stepping in earlier, with families asking harder questions, with systems learning how to listen before it's too late. And for me, it ended with a promise. No more silence. I didn't return to the house until nearly a year had passed, not because I couldn't, but because I refused to go back until I knew it wouldn't own me anymore. The property had been sold in the spring. The new owners renovated it, cut back the trees, replaced the fencing, repainted the porch. They didn't know what had happened there. I preferred it that way. Let them make something new from it. I wasn't interested in reclaiming a building. What I came back for was something I'd buried, quietly, under the pine tree near the back fence the day after the funeral. I found the old rusted tin box where I'd left it. Inside, a faded photo of me and my mother in the backyard, smiling in the wind, a key to the safe deposit box we hadn't needed, and a letter I never sent, to myself. You'll want to forget. You won't. Not really, but when it all feels too big, remember that silence is the currency of people who want to stay powerful, and you are not silent. I hadn't known what I was starting back then. I just needed a place to leave the version of me that still thought Brett's betrayal was the worst thing I'd face. Turns out betrayal is survivable. But complicity, that's what rots everything. The non-profit grew faster than we expected. We rebranded it Clear, Community for Legal Equity and Abuse Response. A senator from Oregon introduced a bill we helped draft. It passed unanimously in committee. The stories kept coming, from cities, from towns with one post office and no attorneys, from adult children who'd been dismissed, from seniors who'd been afraid to speak. One day, we got a call from a nurse in North Dakota. She'd seen a patient sign over her estate to a younger cousin after a morphine injection. She flagged it. Her supervisor told her to let it go. She didn't. She called us. The cousin backed off. The will was amended. The woman died 3 months later, with her name on her house and her story intact. That was the win I held on to. Not the courtroom, not the articles, just that. Someone ended their life seen, not replaced. I kept in touch with Lauren. We'd become something like friends, but sharper. Trauma tends to create strange alliances. She called on a Sunday in June. There's a panel in DC. They want you to speak. I laughed. Again? They're rewriting federal guardianship oversight laws. They want first-hand voices, not just lawyers. I paused. I'm not a policy expert. You're the reason they're doing it. That night, I sat at my desk and opened my mother's final letter again, the one she left for me without knowing if I'd ever read it. They will question your version of me, let them. You lived it. That's stronger than any paperwork. In DC, I sat beside people who had lost more than money, people who'd lost time, clarity, whole years to red tape and denial. When it was my turn to speak, I told the panel the same thing I told myself during every deposition, every email, every late-night document upload. This isn't about revenge, it's about record. Then I handed them a printout. It was a list. Names of every person who had contacted us through Clear. No identifying information, just the city, year, and status. Ongoing, closed, no response. The list was 17 pages long. I asked them to read it aloud, one by one. They didn't make it past the 4th page. Silas visited that fool. He brought his daughter. She ran straight into my arms like she'd known me her whole life. I'd missed every year of her growing up. That didn't matter. She asked if we could bake the same cookies Mum used to make. We tried. They came out uneven and flat. She said they were perfect. That night, Silas and I sat by the window while she slept on the couch. We didn't rehash the past. He didn't ask for absolution. I didn't offer it. But when he said, "Thank you for not letting her be erased," I nodded. She saved herself, I said. I just brought the evidence. Eventually, the calls slowed, the inbox calmed, the press turned to news stories. The courthouse hearings moved on to other names, and I let it. I didn't need to stay at the center to know the impact was still working its way out into the world. Instead, I began teaching workshops. 1 a month, small towns. Local libraries, quiet spaces where people asked real questions. How do I know if it's legal but not right? What if they say I'm being dramatic? What if I'm too late? I gave the same answer every time. You document, you ask, you show up. Even if it's messy, especially when it's messy. On the anniversary of Mum's death, I stood at the river where we'd once scattered some of her ashes. I didn't say anything, just stood with a folded letter in my hand. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew what it said, and more importantly, I knew what it didn't. It didn't beg to be remembered, it just trusted I would. Later that night, I sat on my porch and watched the sky shift. I opened my laptop and created a new folder. Label, Archive inside, I saved every file, every name, every timeline that had come through clear. I encrypted it, duplicated it, and stored one offline. Not because I expected another battle, but because someone else will, and now they won't have to start from zero. This isn't the story I wanted to tell, it's the one I had to. But if it stops someone else from being rewritten, if it keeps one signature from being forged, if it helps one family ask the right question at the right time, then it was never about endings. It was about memory, about record, about refusing to let the truth die quietly. And I think my mother would have liked that.